Okay,
My dad used
it's,
to have this.
it happens to be June 18th. We're already halfway through the month of June. 4 o'clock, this is a regular meeting of town council that I call into order. With that said, it's good to see everybody.
We're all here.
You're all
The
here.
It'll be
band
the
back.
last time for a while.
Yeah, Bill, thanks. You had a great time in Thailand and every place you went.
Loved it.
It's a great place. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And you're back from, Mr. Circus, you're back from
Oh.
Spain?
I've been back for 2 weeks.
Oh, well,
There's just been no meetings.
yeah, there was no meeting.
That's true. There
You
was.
had a good time?
No, I actually didn't.
It was
I
a
make the-
short
I
meeting.
made the first.
Yeah,
I made the
it was
first.
short.
Oh, that's right, there were
June
3 of
meeting.
you.
Yeah,
We saw each other last week at ELTC.
right. We saw it at EOTC, but now the band's back.
Everybody's here. Okay, roll call. Barb?
Alyssa,
Here.
Bill,
Here.
Marky,
Here.
Bob,
Here,
Tom.
Here.
And since we had since I was last here, we were all aware that Rhonda Coxon's mother has passed and had a beautiful memorial service up in Pennsylvania. And I do think she's back next week. I think.
Something.
Yeah, okay. So condolences to Rhonda, and I know that many of you extended wonderful, heartfelt sympathy, and the town did a very beautiful floral arrangement that I'm aware of. So thank you all. I don't have any proclamations. I will now move into public comment. Do I have anyone here who would like to make a public comment? Anyone?
Nope.
Okay, I don't see anyone coming forward. We're going to be moving now into a consent agenda. The first item is a second reading of an ordinance of the Town Council amending sections 452 and 460 of the Snowmass Village Municipal Code as part of the statewide sales tax simplification project. This is on a consent agenda. Since it's an ordinance, it will have to have a roll call. There are draft minutes for 6/4 of 2018 and then draft agendas. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
yeah, so moved.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Other than the ordinance, let's pull the ordinance out and do roll call on the ordinance. Does anyone have any questions
On the ordinance?
on the ordinance?
Nope.
Nope.
Any questions?
No.
I had some, but they're really minor questions that I'll talk to people later. Well, the whole thing in the ordinance, it talks about nonprofit organizations and where is sales tax definitions. Red line draft.
The red line draft.
Hold on, let me get to the red line. It's over here, several. On page 7 of 81, it talks about a definition of a retailer. And then it goes on, retail shall include but is not limited to any auctioneer. So that's retail. So do people pay taxes on auction items?
Yes.
And how do you know, is it the organization reports?
Well, if they're going to conduct an auction in the town, they should have a business license to do so, which that informs them that they're required to pay taxes.
Okay, and then they report the taxes, is that how it's
Just-
worked, what the
just
sales
like
were?
a regular merchant.
Okay,
And I'm not sure, but they might even use the short-term vendor license for an auction, but either way, they're required to get a license.
okay.
Marky, are you referring to a situation where a nonprofit has either a silent or live auction?
Right,
So
Like-
Not what I was taught.
that's not what John's
Oh,
talking
okay,
about.
okay.
I don't
You're talking
think.
about like Anderson Ranch Art Auction?
Yeah, the Anderson Ranch and the Rotary thing and,
Those would be exempt under their
Oh,
federal
okay.
status.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
You answered my question.
Yeah, I thought you were.
Okay, with that said, then I'm fine. Barb, you want to do roll call on this ordinance, please?
Yes. Alyssa?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Hey, hang on a second.
What?
What?
I'm sorry, but but number 3 on that retailer definition,
Okay,
it says charitable organization or government entity which makes sales of tangible personal property to the public, notwithstanding the fact that the merchandise may have been acquired by gift or donation, or that the proceeds are to be used for charitable or government purposes. Okay, so that just defines that nonprofit as a retailer,
Right.
but then someplace else it exempts that retailer from,
Yes.
okay. Sorry,
okay. Okay, Alyssa's yes, Bill?
Yes.
yes,
And then, who am I? Bob
yes.
and Tom. I'm
Yes.
fine. Where were we?
And Marky's a yes.
Marky.
Okay, now the balance of the consent agenda, we have a motion and a second. All in support, say aye.
I
Aye.
have one
Okay.
correction.
Okay,
Where'd it go? Oh, hold on, let me get there.
on minutes or agendas?
On the minutes. On the minutes on page 4 of the minutes, or 19 of 81, line 126. Or actually, it starts at 125. The state legislator has created new definitions for the different models, is what the word is in the minutes as written, and I would suggest that models be changed to classes,
Okay.
because that's how e-bikes are defined.
And I would suggest that it say state legislature than legislator.
True.
Okay, we'll make
Now,
those good.
what does the state call it, models or class?
It's classification.
They call it class.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean,
Yeah.
so,
I'd have to go back and read the act again to be absolutely sure what they call them.
I think we need to be on the same page as what the state calls them, or
Yeah.
the county.
Well,
calls
that's
them,
where I was
right?
trying to go.
Could we just have John to take a look at that one word, that one sentence?
Yeah,
Fine with that,
that's fine.
guys?
That's fine.
Bob, any other corrections?
No.
Okay. Okay, how about the draft agendas? Let's make sure attendance on all these wonderful agendas. Who's gonna be here? You're out, Alyssa, you're out the 9th, the 16th. Clint, you're out the 6th. Should we even have a meeting if you're out?
Oh, yeah. You should have all, I'm gonna load that agenda.
I think we're gonna have your review while you're gone.
That'd be fun.
Oh,
I'm actually driving back from my out of state, so I'm 80% sure I won't be here, but it depends on
how fast you drive?
how fast we drive. So I
Just
thought
don't
I'd
put
better
it
put it
together.
in there just to cover.
After that, is everyone pretty well set?
I'm good with what's
What's there?
there at the moment. Some of
Yes.
my plans may change, but not yet.
I'll be out sometime in September, I don't know when yet.
Me as well.
Put my name on here.
Anybody else? Okay,
They'll just find out.
looks good. Okay, so with the modification to the minutes and no comments on the draft agenda, all in support?
Aye.
Opposed, same
Aye.
sign. Okay, the next item on our agenda. Oh, I do want to give a shout out to the Heritage Fire and the Rustic Grind. Those were two incredible, absolutely incredible events this weekend. So to our marketing and tourism staff, good job. And to Brady Smith, the guy that runs the Kashan 555, he and his team and all the chefs really, really pulled it together. It was huge, roaring success. A lot of people yesterday at Heritage Fire. And Julianne was there and Clint was there, and did you have a good time?
Oh, yeah.
It was fun.
Yes.
A lot of good stuff.
It rained just at the right time.
Yep, it was just perfect. Okay. Let's move on. There is no public hearing, quasi-judicial. Let's move on to second reading of an ordinance of the town council prohibiting the operation of all Class 2 and Class 3 electrical-assisted bicycles on all bike or pedestrian paths and trails within the town of Snowmass Village. Prohibiting the operation of all Class 1 electrical-assisted bicycles on all non-paved paths and trails within the town of Snowmass Village, and permitting the operation of all Class 1 electrical-assisted bicycles only on paved paths and trails within TOSV. So this is a second reading. We've had some public comments on e-bikes. Some of us may have had a few phone calls about e-bikes. We did have a lengthy conversation again at RAFTA last Thursday on e-bikes, and as most of you know, that when we had the bridge construction going in, RAFTA, the board allowed Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on the Rio Grande Trail, even though where we are now was a resolution to only allow for Class 1 bikes. So there was a long, lengthy conversation, and we'll be discussing that again at the July meeting of RAFTA. So there are people down Valley who purchased Class 2 bikes, obviously want to be able to ride on the Rio Grande Trail, and, well, you can understand the potential conflict. So we've asked for some data on the number of accidents and/or personal safety issues that have arisen on that portion of the trail, and we won't see that data even if it, we don't even know if it was collected. That's even far more important. May not have been collected. But there was one thing that I learned, that there was over 1,000 people riding the RAFTA Trail at any given time on bikes.
During the bridge close?
Well, now, per day, from Pitkin County, primarily during the summer, primarily up in Pitkin County on the RAFTA Trail. On
You
the
see
Rio
the
Grande.
RAFTA Trail as in the Rio Grande Trail?
Rio Grande, yeah.
Grande.
Rio Grande, yeah, not the RAFTA.
I
Well,
didn't
it's
know
owned
we
by
were calling it the
RAFTA.
RAFTA Trail.
It's basically RAFTA, other than in Pitkin County where it's maintained by Pitkin
Where have they
County.
been getting that number from?
That was reported by the Trails guy. The RAFTA has 2 employees that do nothing but work on that trail.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I've never seen a counter on the Rio Grande, but just curious.
So these trail guys from, I've seen their trucks, the little white trucks. Are they regulating the Class 2 and 3 bikes? Are they looking at any of the e-bikes?
No.
They look at, what they don't do is they do not have enforcement. They can tell if it's a 1 or 2 or
Right.
a 3, yeah. So they're just reporting. And I do know a lot of people who bought Class 2 bikes during the bridge closure.
I mean, it is difficult to determine a Class 2 versus a Class 1 unless the bike is stopped and you're actually looking at it. If it's
Well,
moving, it's pretty
If
hard.
it's moving, if they're not pedaling and it's moving and they're not
It's a
going
Class
Well,
downhill.
that would be the
Right.
way you know.
That-
Yeah,
Right.
that's
know.
kind of, yeah.
If they're not going downhill and they're not pedaling when
Right.
it's moving.
So now their question is, do we want to do
Do we want to
enforcement?
hold up on this?
I don't think so. I think we need to talk about our community and what we feel that's the right thing to do. We know where Pitkin County has taken their action. We're part of Pitkin County, and I'm fine with where we are.
I mean, I think that one of the stated purposes of writing this ordinance, the way it's written, was for consistency with Pitkin County. If this were to pass in this format, it doesn't mean that going forward, we
can't
couldn't change it to
You
allow
could.
the Class 2s.
You could. And I do, in terms of the conversation at the RAFTA board meeting, my sense was it was going to pass as
As,
a Class 1 onlys.
okay. Okay. Well, again,
Yeah.
you know, RAFTA will do what they do, and maybe the rest of us will respond, or one way or the other.
Right.
Or at least just bring it back for discussion.
Yeah.
But Marky, I appreciate your input on where RAFTA is on this, because it's sort of a fluid situation.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Tell somebody when they get on the
Yeah.
RAFTA trail? In Garfield County, you gotta
Well,
hop off your bike?
you know-
It's from Emma down.
I happened to be riding on the Rio Grande Saturday outside of Aspen, and in the opposite direction, coming towards me, were probably a group of 10 people, all riding rental e-bikes. Now, hopefully, the companies that are renting these, I don't know if anybody's renting them in Snowmass, but they are renting them in Aspen.
They are renting them in Aspen.
Four Mountain Sports is renting them in Aspen, so I'm assuming they're gonna be renting them out here in Snowmass as well.
What I hope is that they don't put any Class 2 bikes in their rental pools. And if this were to be approved, I think it would behoove us to contact maybe all the vendors, bicycle vendors, and just give them a heads up that, that we're only good for Class 1.
I think Picken County has already alerted them and has met with all the major bike shops in Picken County.
Okay,
That's what my understanding was at
Good.
RAFTA.
that's good.
It doesn't hurt us to, in fact, I'm a firm believer that it sometimes takes more than one interaction
Yeah,
for people to hear the message. So perhaps Andy or one of his members of his staff can,
Yeah, we'll actually, through our marketing department, we'll actually do it through our business outreach. I know we started, I don't know exactly where we're at, but we'll continue that to make sure people are aware.
did you have any interaction with the individuals
No.
that were on the trail?
no, we just passed each other.
Okay.
But, yeah, I guess I took note of it mostly because it was such a large group.
That's a huge group.
Yeah, it is a large group. Well, they were in the right place, they were on their side of the line, and I was on my side of the line, and everybody passed each other and was happy.
Threw you off your bike?
Nope.
Were you on your e-bike?
Nope.
Adrian probably was.
And there was an article in the Post-Independent about Pitt County doing
Tried one?
a survey.
Mm-hmm.
They just said there just wasn't quite enough support for Class 2, but they got a fair amount of support for Class 2 as well. But I just don't think they were ready to go there.
Yeah, and it was interesting, the location and the age of the person in terms of support or not support in terms of Class 2. It was very interesting, the entire survey. But they had a good response. It was like 900, was it 900 or 7?
947,
Yeah, they responded. Okay,
49.4 were in favor of Class 2 bikes.
Well, I'll say it again. I said it last time too. I guess my biggest concern is not really the paved trails. It's really the increased instances of people on these e-bikes on the single track trails. And I just really worry about harming the trails. And I don't know what to say other than that. I mean, I think it's a real concern. I've read a bunch of articles on it. You guys, I don't think were here last time when I brought this up, but my husband's been mountain biking a few times and has seen people on these e-bikes on these trails.
ooh,
Yeah, and not necessarily Snowmass, but like Skyline, Ditch Line, that whole thing, and then in Aspen, whatever those trails are called. I don't do them, but the ones that people do off of Hunter Creek or Smuggler or whatever it is. So, I mean, that is my biggest concern. And if you saw the email we got from Matt Dubay, he said, the same thing. I mean, I think that for transportation purposes, e-bikes are great. And if it'll keep people, from driving, that's a great thing. And there's a lot of people who, are getting older and can't ride without the assistance of a e-bike. I get that. I just think that I'm very concerned about the trails because those bikes are heavy and you get enough of them on those trails, and it's not just a problem for bikers, but it's also a problem for hikers. And I am concerned about the enforcement on those trails.
Well, we talked about this last time, too.
Yep.
Just as we have signage that has, crossed off dogs and crossed off mechanical motor vehicles, we put in, e-bike. You just put it up there at the trailhead, because the one good thing about the mountain bike trails is that they all have trailheads. So there are probably, there are fewer ways, let's put it this way, there are fewer ways to get into and out of the various trail systems than what would happen on, on public roads and on paved paths.
No, I agree. I mean, I think also, too, it's like you might get someone on an e-bike who might try to be a little bit more daring because they're getting assistance, and they might get on something that they shouldn't be on. I don't know. I just think that whatever the outreach is and whatever we're telling the public, I think we need to do some good education pieces. I mean, in Matt's email, he suggested a system of enforcement and fines similar to wildlife closures. I don't know what those fines are, and I know we talked a little bit about last time, and we said, well, maybe we're not ready to move to a fine system right now, and if there's increased usage on these trails, people doing what they're not supposed to be doing, then maybe we go that far.
There is a fine system, it's just not specific to this ordinance. They would go into court and they would be subject to all our standard fines that are in municipal court. What the council said was, we're not gonna set up a specific fine system just for this. So there would be, if you're caught and you go to court and you're found guilty, you're absolutely subject to fine.
So what's the fine?
Up to $1,000 and a year in jail. And we discussed this last time. You remember
Yeah.
we talked about the penalty
Yeah.
assessment?
Yep.
And the idea is court educates people like maybe even better than a simple, I'll just pay the fine and not bother with it. When they have to take some time out of their day and come and talk to the judge to resolve the charges that seem to be a better way to resolve them. But if you want to, we can always include a penalty assessment schedule whereby they'd get a citation and pay the fine online and proceed. But you didn't elect to do that last time.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying we should. I'm just throwing that back out there, what my concerns are.
I don't really think that's a bad idea. We haven't solved the biker-hiker conflict, and now we've added one more potential with e-bikes. And
It's a slightly different comparison because bikes using the trail and hikers using the trail, neither one are in violation.
no, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now
Whereas if you're on a Class 2 bike or a Class 1 on an unpaved, you're in violation.
you're in violation.
Yeah.
I think the fine system works. How about the rest of you?
I think we discussed the fine system months ago when Brian Olson was here. We did talk a little bit about skiing in a closed area. Is what, John, is it $250 now?
We just raised that. I think you all raised it before the ski season.
Did
Right.
raise
I
it.
can't tell you the exact
I think
rate.
it's more than a lift ticket cost, I know that. So that was one of the criteria. Right.
But one of the reasons Brian came for us to add those, right, is so his enforcement officers had some teeth,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so, I guess the question is, do we feel like we need to have some teeth to prop up?
It's extra teeth. You've got the teeth. Right now, the way this is written, up to $1,000, up to a year in jail. So, it's a way that the ticket's written versus being required to go to court and some other different things. But I think we're suggesting if you're all amenable to keep it as is, and if we see issues that need to be addressed, whether it's class 2, whether it's the fine system, we'll be sure to bring that back to you, but we think this is the appropriate way to start.
I think it's a good start.
Okay.
I mean, I would, after the summer and fall, once the trails aren't being used as much, I would like to see some sort of follow-up report of, any incidences that arose and anything else, just how it went. Because I am a little concerned.
Well, I'm equally concerned. It's hard enough with
For different
bikers and
reasons.
hikers.
Right.
For different reasons.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
just
now you
a-
got moose out there. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, by the way, John Flynn, early this morning before he came to the club, took some pictures of the mama cow and 2 calves right in his backyard at CC Homes
really?
this morning at 6 a.m.
Well,
So they're still
Oh, they're
around.
I saw them the other day.
we
they're
love
looking-
to welcome our guest.
Yep.
They're getting very comfortable, and I'm glad
People are taking a lot of
people are
pictures.
leaving them alone.
They have to be. But the picture that Johnny Boyd took, there were people standing outside, not
Yeah.
more than 6 feet
That was
away.
dumb.
You do not want to be doing that.
No, no. Okay, we're back on e-bikes. Okay, do I have a motion for approval for ordinance 5 of 2018, second reading?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Bill. Any further discussion?
Does this take any comment?
We are going, public comment. Anybody out there on e-bikes? If not, let's move on and move towards roll call.
Okay, Alyssa,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Marky,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. The next item is a comp plan review process. And Julianne, I assume you're here to talk about the comp plan?
I am. All right. Really, I just wanted to be able to come to you today and just kind of make sure that you were aware of what we envision this timeline to look like and see if there's any input that you would like to give in regard to that. We have been working over the last several months with Planning Commission on a number of edits. You may recall there was discussion about trying to make it a little shorter, make it more succinct, try and take a lot of the fluff, if you will, out, take some of the CPA drawings and put those in the appendices along with some other documents. The background, which we call the reflection section, is in the appendices. So the essence of the plan at this point is right around 60 pages. And there's essentially 5 pieces to it. It's the executive summary, which we all worked together on with the Planning Commission, and that hasn't changed. The principles haven't changed. The plan framework has been a little bit more concise. You may recall we had the CPAs were in there, and so now we're just having the conservation and development maps along with the wildlife map in that section. And then the strategic initiatives are essentially where we have now 7 goals and policies that fall under each of those goals. So I'm guessing that there's somewhere around maybe 30 policies in total, which in my mind, in my way of thinking, that this is really the meat of the plan. And we took those elements under the goals and the policies and the next steps, and we created a table so that when you as decision makers or Planning Commission as decision makers are considering a land use application or whatever decision, that it should be fairly easy for you to just go to that one table and see, is it consistent with the policies of the comprehensive plan. So I think that will be a really good tool for all of us to be able to use.
Julianne, is that table in that strategic initiative section?
Yes, it is. It's at the back of it. Yep. And that was another recommendation that the Planning Commission wanted to see that brought forward rather than having that in the appendix, which is where we originally had it.
Policies, are they high-level policies, or do they really have good meat to them? Can you, for example, just give us an example, what type of policy might we see?
Well, the policies are broken up essentially into things like arts and culture, transportation,
Okay,
mobility, in other words, making it much more walkable, bikeable, et cetera, Transparency in government.
Okay.
Not really inconsistent with your all goals
Right,
that you've
okay.
developed over the course of the last couple years. So those are kind of like the broad topics. And then there's specific, policies that come out that say, hey, we want to encourage this. This is important to our community. And then the next steps are things that we should do in order to implement those policies. So, I think that it's definitely going to be a lot more usable for those of us that use the plan on a regular basis.
We had a lot of discussion about employee housing and what that whole mitigation piece, have y'all landed on what that looks like now?
We still have the 60%
Okay,
mitigation rate is included in the comp plan.
60%
So-
of development, new development, or 60% for the entire village?
60%, which is the current rate that's in the Land Use and Development Code, that policy about mitigating for development at that rate is still
Well,
in
that's-
the plan.
But let's be clear, that's the code section that's saying, so the broad topic, the broad policy issue of how many employees should we have living in the village,
Right.
that percentage, as I recall, was removed.
That percentage was removed, but we had some language in there that talked about it was still a policy, a key policy, in order to encourage the affordable housing within the resources of the town to do so.
So, but those are some things that are gonna be, and I've made it very clear to the planning commission that I think that there's a disagreement, I think, between the majority of the council and the planning commission on that issue. The planning commission's edited it, it is what it says right now, and you'll see those coming forward, and that's when you'll have a chance to say, well, close, but we wanna make these tweaks here and there, and that's what this whole public hearing process is for you guys to put, you have the final stamp as the town council on it.
Yeah, I just was hoping that we would have better clarity on policy, so it sounds as though we're getting there.
Yeah, I think that that's gonna be a point of discussion.
Well, that is just one, probably. Okay.
And that's the easiest one to point to. I think everything else is pretty much lined up, but I think that's just one that we've consistently said the two boards don't have the same vision right now. And it might be closer. I don't want to say it's opposing. I think it's just
Right.
not 100% lined up.
You might want an actual number in there. Planning Commission did not want to have a specific number. So,
But since the format has changed quite a bit, we won't get a redlined version per
No.
se.
You'll get a clean copy, and it'll be 60 pages of meat, and you're going to have to start at 60 pages.
When are we getting that?
July 2nd, hopefully. We're aiming for July 2nd.
Okay.
That-
For the meeting before, the Thursday before that.
yeah, our expectation is you will have a clean copy on that packet before July 2nd. July 2nd is the date that we scheduled the first public hearing for you to begin discussion. In the meantime, the think tank will get a copy and the planning commission will get a copy. We're trying to land on a think tank date of either July 9th or 10th, still working that out. And then planning commission is setting forth a couple of meetings in July, like the 11th, the 18th, the 25th, to finish up what they want to put forward in a resolution to town council. And what we're suggesting is that, presuming planning commission gets done by the 25th, we'd be able to move forward their resolution to council for consideration, because you can't act on first reading until you've gotten those comments from the planning commission. So we're suggesting that could happen maybe August 6th,
It's a li-
if you're ready for it.
The planning, it's a little different. The planning commission has to have its comments to you by the time you start first reading. You get to set your date of first reading, and the planning commission needs to do their schedule in conformance with when you want to set first reading. So that's why we've kind of scheduled out some of those ref dates.
Yeah, I kind of find it difficult to schedule the first reading before any of us have seen this new draft.
And there's nothing scheduled. I mean, if you look on we've got August 6th,
Yeah,
and it's question mark, question mark. So if we've got to move it back, it can. In order for you to start your hearing process, though, the hearing process was noticed in the paper for July 2nd. That date we should stick to, we're hoping.
okay.
And then if you love it, we can change it around, but we've got it basically penciled in for that August 6th date, thinking that 3 planning commission meetings should be enough for them to get their recommendation to you. And then you guys, continue forward, taking all the, that's the only correlated input that needs to happen. I mean, that's the only thing the code talks to, is they need to have their input to you formally before you start your first reading.
And then do we do a joint session with them or no?
No, it's not required under the,
Okay.
section of the code.
Okay,
under the
because that
comprehensive
one
plan.
meeting we had with the planning commission on the comp plan was very, very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I guess I've spoken with Jamie about this, but it seems to make sense that when the planning commission provides recommendations to the council, that someone from the planning commission be at that meeting to answer questions from the council as to how the planning commission got to where they got. And I just think, and particularly something as important as a comp plan, I think that first meeting doesn't necessarily have to be the full planning commission, but there should be a planning commission representative there to help us to understand some of their logic and if necessary.
Once the resolution's adopted, you mean?
Yeah, once the resolution's done.
So
So
So really to,
Talking like the first reading, August 6th.
We could aim to have them there on August
it's really
6th.
to help us understand their resolution.
Schedule that joint, invite them after they've had some discussion.
Yeah. So John said we should see how you guys do in July with it. I agree.
Okay,
But if we're penciling in and trying for it, the feedback that you've got is, when that resolution is presented to the council, I'll have someone from the planning commission there to talk it through. We can certainly work towards that.
And my suggestion was, if you schedule people from the planning commission after you've had some discussion on
Yeah.
your own, it will be more effective, rather than having, you haven't done anything with it and you've got them sitting there. If you spend some time with it and then invite them in, nothing prevents you from doing that at all. Because you may find, rather than telling them that they have to be here, you may find that their resolution with recommendations, and the draft they've sent you, are eminently clear, and that's, to schedule it before you know what kinds of questions you want to ask them.
Well, we don't know what we don't know at
Yeah,
this point,
that's right.
so.
Yeah, I think it'll be really helpful. It was certainly that joint meeting, I think, shed a lot of light on both sides. What's going to be the easiest way to reconcile those changes from the first draft to the public draft, since that format has changed so much?
Well, what you'll be seeing is the final draft. And that final draft will go on the website. It'll go into all of your hands. It'll have many different changes or what have you. But essentially, what we would like to see you do is read it through, basically starting on page 1, and work it through and see if it's consistent with with what you believe your policy should be.
So is it significantly different than the draft we saw from TPUC?
The format is.
The format is, but-
130 or 160 pages.
Well, the entire document is about 190, but
Okay.
that's mostly appendices.
Okay.
It's only 60 pages
It's just
now,
executive summary.
is what I am calling the meat of the plan. So I think that you're going to find that it's very similar. It's got a lot of the same graphics, a lot of the same pictures, but where we had a lot of duplicative information, we pulled a lot of that out so that it was a lot more succinct. So
So
I
at
don't
the-
think you're going to see it being significantly different than the draft that
But
you saw
just in
previously.
reference to, say, employee housing, where we had a percentage in at one point and now we don't, those types of changes, how do we track those down?
We can work.
Do
to
we have a
identify-
red line version that we, no?
The red line version would be almost unreadable because of the
Okay.
cuts and pace. What we could do is we can take a shot at trying to identify the biggest points of change. I mean, that's an easy one to point to because
Yeah,
that's the biggest.
And that was where you had the most discussion.
And going to a number 2 gets way harder. I can't even do it.
Okay, fair enough.
So I think the majority of it's going to be right there. I think
Yeah, I think
that's,
so too.
that's a lot of it.
Clint, July 2nd, for the consent agenda at the moment, that's all we have on there.
Yeah.
So for the July 2nd meeting,
Our hope is, if there's nothing else that gets, there might be some administrative things that get on that agenda, but, we'll spend, if it's up, if that's the primary topic on the agenda, we could see spending the 2 hours and walking you through it and saying, here's the background, here's how we got here,
We'll pull it up here, so it's easy to follow
and
for everybody.
Okay.
and say, here's the big things, and we'll do our best to identify the big topics. And honestly, it reads like that, so it won't be difficult for us to point those out.
Okay, good.
I guess I would just like to request that update or that draft be distributed to the council as soon as it's available. Because sending it out on Thursday, when it's 100+ pages long, is difficult to actually get through and get into the meat. So any number of days in advance of that would certainly be helpful.
We don't plan on getting it till the 27th, that day.
You don't plan on
And-
getting
and-
it
but-
either?
But to that point, we expect this adoption process to take well over a month. So I don't think you need to have it read by that first Monday. And
Can
we'll
we-
treat it that Monday as an
We get
introduction.
hard copies of it as well as the iLegislate.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
hard copies.
But I
Maybe
don't-
Barb, maybe that's for you to ask, but
Yes, we can do that for sure.
because to have that many pages and notes on
Yeah.
iLegislate is a challenge.
Yeah, I wind up printing it.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess I want to say, we do not expect you to come in fully prepared for 100% of the conversation on that Monday. Our vision, because of the way the hearing was noticed, is we will start it, we will walk you through it, we'll hit all the highlights, and then hopefully if you've read some of it, hopefully then they'll make the rest of the reading that much more comprehensive, and then your first reading isn't even scheduled for a month out, and then that can take as long as you want, and then you got a second reading.
And you're not going to get another version in between.
So
This is it.
This is the one that we're taking
This
through
is
the
the
process.
one, yeah.
So we've got weeks and weeks to get through it, so.
Okay. Okay.
And if
Oh,
you love it
fun,
on the
we
day
can't
one, then
wait.
great, we can just adopt it. I won't plan on
Some holiday reading.
it. I won't plan on it.
Well, 60 pages is better than
It's better than 759.
I legislate pages.
Are you hoping that this whole thing is approved before the election?
Yes.
Of course.
Me too,
I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be, quite honestly.
because we're question intensive. I'm just saying, it's wonderful. We have a very engaged town council, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and
I think that
discussion.
I would expect a lot of questions, but I think that we can also give you background on virtually everything that, how we ended up getting to where we did. So,
I forgot it was election in November.
Yeah, there's that thing too. And we won't see any other PUDs coming through simultaneously this fall?
not that we're aware of. Now, of course, we could see Enclave coming through final, but they're under the previous comprehensive plan. And we could see the Snowmass Center, and they've come in under the previous comprehensive plan. So,
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we give the comp plan our full focus and energy that it deserves. And the minute we start getting PUDs that are, as you know,
yeah,
it's a lot of work.
agreed. I
Okay.
don't see anything tracking
Okay,
through our process right now.
Okay.
Because we do have a lot of lead time in the front when they submit to make sure it's complete.
okay.
So I wouldn't envision you're gonna even see a PUD, if you do, before September, October at this point,
And we'll be done with this.
presumably.
Okay, what other questions for Julianne?
That's it for me.
That's it for me.
I'm excited
Thanks,
to see you.
Julianne.
I am too. It's that gift that you didn't get to see at Christmas time, and you waited and you wait. I'm really excited to see it because our old one, our current one is kind of dated.
Stay.
Yeah. I think this will be a much
Is
easier to
T-Puck still
use.
working with us?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okey dokey, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Julianne.
thank you, Julianne.
Okay. The next item is a continued discussion regarding marijuana. And the key emphasis tonight is on the financial analysis. And guess who is joining us? Travis. Did you
How's it
put
going?
all this together? Okay,
Did. I don't have much in the way of presentation, but I was just gonna pull up these numbers in case we wanna refer to them as we
I
go
really,
here.
really would ask that you go through the detail, because needless to say, when we were over at Heritage Fire, I was asking Clint a lot of questions about numbers.
Okay.
And, because I was trying to really put it together too, and I was having problems doing the math.
Yeah.
So why don't you
let's
walk
go
us all
it.
through it, and people who are watching,
200%.
yeah, it's all the key assumptions, if we could just do it from, as you've presented it, and where the numbers are drawn from, because it's gonna be important to the community as we continue with this discussion, not only tonight, but future, okay?
Yeah, be happy to. So, there is a lot of financial information out there from municipalities across the state, which has been super helpful, to make sure that we were comparing apples to apples. So
Would you mind just pulling your?
Travis.
what a rookie mistake. To make sure we're comparing apples to apples, we basically ignored tax revenues and looked strictly at the amount of marijuana sales within each of these jurisdictions. That way, even if they did have a 5% excise tax, or if their regular tax rate was higher than one place or the other, we knew that we were looking at apples to apples again. So as you can see, for these 8 jurisdictions, we have the total sales for marijuana products in 2017 on the left-hand column, and we compared that to all of their taxable sales during 2017.
So that was their total taxable sales in that community, not just from marijuana?
Correct. That's all general retail, liquor, food, etc.
Okay.
So you can see on that right-hand column, which is what we were after, a range from 1.6% to 3.5% that marijuana makes up of these communities' tax base. We were wanting to be a little bit conservative in our estimate, so we basically rounded that down and used a range of 1% to 3% of our own tax base here in Snowmass Village for all of 2017, which was roughly $195 million. 1% of that is this number on the left, as is 3% of that number right here. So that's our low estimate and our high estimate of what marijuana sales would be in Snowmass Village if we were in a similar range as what is being experienced across the state.
So, looking at that and the assumption of the 3%, that's up to kind of where Crested Butte was, and then City of Aspen was 1.6.
Correct. Yeah, so
Has that fluctuated over the years that Aspen has been the historical basis for these communities? Because I was looking at Breck, and they moved people out of Breck from the downtown area out to that other
Right.
area.
I don't know that it's fluctuated. I think if anything, these jurisdictions are just experiencing an increase. So
Okay.
I remember the big news with the City of Aspen was that it was now catching up with liquor sales. Unfortunately, we can't release our liquor sales figures, which was requested just because we only have 2 shops here in town. But
Do you know what our liquor sales are?
no.
We break them down to, our category is larger: food, drugs, and liquor stores. So that's as concise as we can do it without giving away individual sales data.
Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here, but we did include this chart here just to kind of give you some context on this 1 to 3% range. You can see the liquor store category here, as Clint just mentioned, is presented in aggregate with all of our food and drug retail sales as well.
Yeah.
So that comes in at
So you really
19
can't tease it out.
correct.
Okay.
So again, if we took these low and high estimates of 1.9 to 5.8 million dollars in sales, and we basically just do the math with the taxes that we already have in place, in addition to what would be our share of the 15% Colorado excise tax that's already in place, we came up with these, I'll emphasize the word estimates, of $97,000 to $292,000. in tax revenue for the town of Snowmass Village. Now, as you can see, we've broken that up from the general fund sales tax that's already in place to the marketing sales tax that's in place and our share of the Colorado excise tax. We also threw in this possible excise tax that we've discussed at previous meetings of 5%, which would actually double those figures.
Okay, that's where I got hung up, was on that number. The
And just for-
97 and then the 97 for,
For those of you that don't speak bureaucratic, excise tax, most people would call it a sales tax. So that's assuming an additional 5% sales tax. Because of the way it's collected, it's an excise tax. But the rest of us would just see that as a 5% additional sales tax. And that's, again, that would need to be voter approved, and one of the questions before you all, whether we want to tax additionally or not. But that's why that number's there, just for background information.
And the reason this shows a doubling of the revenues is because the total above just happens to add up to 5% as well. So it'd basically be another 5% on top of that. Now, I think it's safe to say that it wouldn't exactly double. You know, I think there is some less elasticity in the market, so if the price went up, it's probably safe to assume the sales would drop, but I don't know how to estimate that.
so in Aspen, they tax only recreational, correct?
There's
not an
no
excise
additional excise tax. They only are above that first blue line.
Correct.
They do not have a special tax on marijuana sales.
She's asking if there's a tax on medical marijuana sales.
Medical pays sales tax?
But not
I'm asking
this
that.
Colorado excise tax.
What now?
So medical sales are subject to sales tax, just like any other product,
Right, but not at the
not
50.
this Colorado 15% excise tax.
And what is the rate on medical? Is it the same?
Yes.
The standard
6%
sales
rate.
tax rate.
Sales?
Well, in our case, it'd be 5%.
In our case, it'd be 10.4.
Almost 11 cents on
In this example, it'd be 3.5. Because our sales tax rate is 3.5. That 10.4 that just got said is our total all-in.
Right, okay.
This sales tax, keeping apples to apples,
Yes.
would be applicable to medical marijuana and retail marijuana, recreational marijuana. That 1.5 state is only applied to retail marijuana, not medical.
Oh, I see. So, just for some clarification, the local share of the Colorado excise tax applies to recreational only, and it is a tax that all jurisdictions, all municipalities with recreational marijuana facilities are required to charge, in addition to any local sales tax.
I would say it's collected by the state would be probably more accurate than charged, because you wouldn't actually see it on a receipt, and that's the difference between sales tax and excise tax.
Okay.
Excise tax are generally on the backside. So the state collects it, and that's the state's share back of what they collect.
All right, okay.
So each retailer then reports their income to the state, pays their taxes, and then a portion comes back to,
For that excise part, yes.
okay. Let me turn this off.
And a retailer can be both recreational and medical? Or do they have to have separate storefronts?
No, I believe as of recently they can do both.
They can do both.
Yeah, come on up. Yeah, come on up.
Hi, Renee Grossman. I own 2 marijuana stores.
Renee, just come up to a microphone,
Yeah,
please. There you
Thanks.
go.
So I'm happy to answer any questions I can. I know Lauren has a lot of experience as well. I own High Q, one in Carbondale, one in Silt. Silt's been open for 3.5 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. On the sales tax, it's correct that it's called an excise tax, but to the consumer, it's a sales tax. In October of last year, the state changed it so that Medical marijuana is just total normal sales tax of a municipality. Same state amount. Retail marijuana, they removed the 2.9% state sales tax and they increased the 10% excise tax to 15%. They then remit 10% of that back to the local municipality that allows it. For example, in Silt, my customers pay 19% total sales tax on retail marijuana sales. In Carbondale, they pay 25.5% tax because Carbondale has an extra 5% tax. I think
So-
that's part of why Carbondale's sales are less than they really should be for a town that size.
So, Silt is 19%.
Yep. Aspen is 21.3% is the total that a customer will see. For Snowmass Village, it would be 22.5% unless you decided to add an additional tax, which would make it 27.5%.
So you said Carbondale is 29, is that correct?
Carbondale's 25.5.
25.5.
And I will tell you, I am in discussions with the town to have them consider eliminating that extra tax because I do think that it is encouraging their customers to shop elsewhere and they're sending business to Aspen.
What is Glenwood?
Glenwood is, it's 4.8% less than Carbondale, so that would make it like 21-ish, 21.2, I think, yeah. Did I get that right? No,
No,
20 point,
20.2.
yeah, 20.2.
And that's only on recreational.
That's only on recreational, yes. And the other question about can you have both? They're two separate licenses. They can be co-located or they can have separate entrances and can be completely separate. The difference being if they're completely separate, then the medical side can service patients that are between the ages of 18 and 21 who have a valid medical marijuana card.
And otherwise, they just have to they share the same door and it's 21 and over.
Right, right. But then everything in the store is separate because it's all tracked separately by the state.
How much time does it spend reporting to the state? Seems as though there's a lot of record keeping here.
Well, everything right now is real time. A couple weeks ago, it used to be we uploaded our sales on a daily basis. It's all electronic through our POS systems. Now it's all transactional reporting, so it's real time.
Okay.
And it's still all cash, right? I understand there's some Colorado banks that are looking at getting in the business.
I don't have a lot of knowledge on this. I am not at a Colorado bank that allows it. There are some that do, mostly on the Front Range. I'm in discussions with one. They have to get somebody out west to do some due diligence. But there are some companies that will offer a cashless ATM, which, is supported by a bank. There are more and more banks starting to get into this space. There are a lot of bills in Congress that are pending to allow access to banking, but it is a challenge of the industry. It's less of a challenge for a store because you're just not doing volume like if you were a manufacturer or a cultivation company, but those companies tend to pay the higher prices in order to get into the banks that will allow it.
What about security? What have you found in any of your down valley, Silt to Carbondale, any extra security required?
Well, the state has quite substantial security requirements. The towns, as the local licensing authority, have the right to augment and add additional security requirements. We, as a company, have put in additional security requirements. So we have film on our glass so it can't be shattered if somebody, we have contact sensors everywhere, you have motion sensors everywhere, you obviously have 24/7 alarm monitoring. A lot of that's required by the state. You have surveillance cameras that maintain the digital copy for a period, I think it's 40 days. And correct me if I say anything wrong. So there, I mean, we have panic alarms,
So I think what
yeah.
the security I'm
Specific
referring to is, how do you
protocols.
handle all the, you don't have to,
Yeah.
you don't have to admit and how, but how do these shops handle all the cash? Since the banks are not allowed to be involved, you got a lot of cash on hand.
Well, I'll just finish one thing real quick on the security. What I will say is in 3.5 years in Silt, we've never had an issue. We did one time have somebody over the age of 21 who bought a product and gave it to someone under the age of 21 who shared it with girls at the high school. The sheriff came into our store. He had the product. It had our sticker. We looked up the sale. We handed him a picture of the guy. And they arrested him that day.
Good for you.
So, and I think these shops that people tried to break into them, recently there were a few. I
Right.
think those were the ones that were more hidden. If you look at the ones that are more out in the open, I mean, just think about it. You're not gonna go somewhere where people can see you. But we have protocols also with the police department so that, I mean, they're our friends. You know, so anyway, on the money, you know, I have an accounting background. So, I'm just a hawk about accounting for all my cash. You do end up paying for a lot of things in cash.
Right.
You buy a lot of your inventory in cash. I pay my employees in cash. I deduct payroll taxes. But you basically just have to be very diligent about your accounting. The majority of what we use bank accounts for, this is the hypocritical side of things, is to remit federal payroll taxes, federal income taxes, state income taxes, state excise taxes, state payroll taxes, unemployment insurance taxes. All that has to be remitted online.
So how do you do that if you're a cash business?
Well,
You convert it over to a personal account?
right now, since I've basically been asked to not bank at every bank in the Roaring Fork Valley, I purchase money orders and I mail them to an out-of-state bank.
Okay. Wow.
And,
Hey, can you say that again? You've been asked not to,
yeah, what happens is if they find out that you're banking marijuana, or they just see a lot of cash transactions, they just close your account. They can't keep your money. You're not doing anything illegal. It's a risk management decision that the banking institutions have made that they do not want to bank the industry. I'm sure Lauren has plenty of clients that do have banking solutions, because like I said, there are about 4 or 5 banks in the state that will take your money. It's just, it's a little more complicated and a little more expensive.
right? Interesting.
Okay. Back to the numbers.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that's the revenue side of it. We did provide just a very brief summary of some of the costs we were seeing around enforcement and licensing across the state. Safe to say they're fairly nominal. There was a couple of municipalities that used the revenue or made the decision to add a police officer for enforcement issues. And then we did talk to a lot of municipalities that have absorbed the licensing process with the existing staff. But he also noted that the state does offer some reimbursements for just processing and enforcing the licensing for marijuana dispensaries. Aspen received roughly $10,000 for that in 2017.
That probably didn't cover their cost.
I don't know. The town of Telluride also got back to me late last week after press time and said they received $3,000 for that same
Yeah,
kind
you're
of,
not gonna get a lot of money.
Right.
So it's like
just a,
negligible.
nominal reimbursement from the state. So that's kind of the financial picture. In terms of next steps, we kind of outlined that with 2 major frameworks in your packet. The first would be to make this decision as town council to either prohibit, allow, or extend the current moratorium. And the second framework would be to refer the matter to the voters through a ballot question. If that were the avenue that the town council would like to pursue, we included kind of a rough outline of what the timing should look like if we wanted to get that ball rolling. And that is all I have.
One of the questions that Alyssa asked at a previous meeting was, where is a potential space, or do we have any space? Did you do any homework on that?
We did. So we started looking at some different restrictions, zoning restrictions that municipalities do everywhere, and it's safe to say there are a lot of different ways that we could go about doing that. A lot of examples that we could follow.
I'm gonna tackle this.
Yes, please.
What?
I mean, there's a lot of different property owners, and we really need to get the direction from the council on where you'd want to allow it. There's two ways to kind of approach it. Do you want to restrict where it's allowed, or do you want to prohibit it from other spots? Some towns say you can't be within 500 feet of a child care facility. Some communities say you need to be in a area that's zoned ABC, whatever you want. And so it depends on how you approach that kind of idea. Is it more restrictive or more, which way do you want to control it? So we did not go property owner by property owner. And the example that we kind of got stuck with is, we don't know if the council would want to allow it at the Timberline, as part of the Edge restaurant, or we don't know if the council would want to allow it at Viceroy, or would it only be at the center? Would it be on the second floor of the mall? Or we didn't have that kind of direction from you all. So rather than doing a bunch of guesses and calling property owners and property managers, we thought we need to kind of get some of that direction from you all to understand how you'd want to approach that issue. So that's the long-winded answer to, we don't have an idea of who would allow it or who wouldn't, because we didn't call every property owner and manager to ask.
So on those cities up there that you had, the 8 cities, do you have any information that would be helpful to us to advise it, where they allow it, where they don't allow it, or any of the detail behind those?
Well, I mean, you spoke to Breckenridge already. We also spoke to a lot of municipalities that just capped the number of licenses. I think one of the things we did kind of settle on was that a 2 license cap would probably be a bad idea for us, just because it creates a scarce resource and kind of creates competition.
Why 2? Why not just 1 if we do it?
Because you'd be giving a $4 million, I mean, if these estimates are right, between a $2 and a $6 million business to monopoly to one individual or one corporation. And again, that's going to be decisions that you all have to make. But, I know that was kind of the thought. It's like, oh, geez, if we limit it, great. And then it gets to be a political decision for you all. But just looking at those revenue numbers between 2 and 6 million, it gets to be, we need a more thoughtful discussion on, say, how many stores is that reasonable for?
Also, to some extent, the market is going to limit it by itself.
Sure.
So, it's, if there were no limits, we're not going to have 10 people coming in here and trying to set up shop, because there isn't enough business to support them.
I'm not even sure there's enough business support too.
Well, at $5.8 million, that's, I think, enough business to support too.
That's on the high side.
Well, I look at it on a positive note. You
Well,
look at it on a negative note.
No, I'm looking at the low side. If Aspen is only 1.6 of their total, I don't know how you can have 3.5% or 3%.
Well, so if it were 1.6, so instead of what, $2 million, it'll be $3 million. So, I mean, we got people in the audience who are in the business. Is $3 million is $1.5 million a year out of a store? Is that enough sales volume to make it interesting and worthwhile having a license? So I see one shaking head, but Renee?
I would say yes.
It all depends on the rent.
Oh, there's that thing called rent.
Well,
Yeah.
of course it does, but
I mean, the Aspen rent is probably, I don't know. But that's a factor.
can we call on this person.
Lauren, can we have Lauren come up and?
Well, sure.
I need to use a microphone.
Lauren, there's a microphone up on the, or you can share the one with Renee, it doesn't matter.
We know
Lauren
each other.
Maiden. I'm an attorney. I'm not in the business. I represent people in the business all over the state of Colorado. So I don't limit to our valley by any means.
Where's your practice located, Lauren?
I have an office in Aspen. I have an office in Wheat Ridge.
Okay, thank you.
I have been in this business since before Amendment 20 was passed. Amendment 20 is our medical marijuana constitutional amendment. I've been doing it pretty much nonstop, with breaks when there was no activity. That being said, towns have decided to do it in all different manners of restriction. They can zone it to an area. Like you know, Breckenridge did Airport Road after they decided in town was just not what they wanted. You can zone it to commercial, which is what Aspen did. You can do commercial, you can do commercial core, you can do historical. You can put caps on them. You can, you can say that, in this part of town, you can say not on the first level, you can say only on the second level. You can say not within 100 feet of any residential. Denver is one of the more difficult locations to get into the business because they've now zoned it basically into non-existence because of their zoning restrictions. So they basically are not letting anyone new into the game based on what they already have because of their new restrictions as well. So towns are free to do what they want. I think it's very helpful to have that discussion about how you want to present yourselves. I don't think it's an evil eyesore, and I do think that hiding it can create potential problems. That being said, I can answer any of your questions, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Lauren, what kind of potential problems are you talking about by hiding it? What does that mean?
I think that the more visible it is, the less corridors people have to congregate, and I think that can be a potential issue that I've seen. And not only that, but people who don't have a lot of places to go and want to loiter around. When you're in a recessed location, it provides more sanctuary for somebody in that type of position, I believe. So idle time, idle hands, I don't know, but it definitely creates an image that's not super pretty. And so I think that that's an issue that not only for potential crime, but for potential image. I don't think it's to be hidden in general, but I think it creates a potential problem.
Yeah, as you know, we have basically 3 commercial areas. The mall up yonder, and then you've got this location in Base Village.
And the shops down,
Well,
And
she's thinking
you
this.
do, that's
no, I'm thinking about this, where the
Condo.
offices.
They're all condos.
The offices outside of the,
yeah, those are all condominiums.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they would be potential.
I would also add to that, to think about people's behavior when they're in Snowmass Village. Because you asked if that was a reasonable market size, and I kind of just, said, okay, based on what John said, that you've got a 110-day season here, and if you had 2 stores and each store got 200 customers today, spending an average of $100, which is not much, that's a $4.4 million market right there. So if you look at it at that level, this is not pie in the sky. I mean, this is realistic. I mean, I've been in this business for 3.5 years. The tourists typically will spend about an average of $100. Somebody who's visiting a town for a week will come into your store 2 to 3 times during that week. I also think that your market will be dramatically different if it's walking distance from the slopes versus not. Because if you just think again about people's behavior, they come off the slopes, they put their stuff down, they go to après-ski, they have some snacks, they have some drinks, then maybe they stop at the market or, you know, the little shop and they go to the liquor store, they could go to the cannabis store, pick up their stuff, and then they're going back to their hotel or condo. And then they can just take their Uber into Aspen if they're going into Aspen for their evening activity. So you have one stop. If they have to drive somewhere in Snowmass, I think they're more likely to say, you know what, we're going into Aspen later, we'll pick it up when we're there. So I really think you have to think of this at the very basic kind of grassroots. And there is a lot you can do with your sign ordinances, with your, just, you know, I mean, like Carbondale is very restrictive on their signage. Every marijuana store at the state level, has to have opaque windows, so no one can see product from outside. So Carbondale wouldn't even let me put a sign with the name of the store on it, so I did like a mural of aspen trees and a moose. So there's a lot you can do that, you know what I mean, makes it not look like a pot shop, but look like an upscale retail store.
You know, one of the struggles we have here is the values of this community being a child-friendly ski resort. And we've heard a lot from our visiting families that they plain do not want to have their kids, anywhere close to walking down the commercial property, and there is a marijuana shop. And I think we have to appreciate the values of what this community has been founded on. So the commercial.
Oh, I completely
Yeah,
appreciate that. But what I'm saying is maybe you go with in the second floor. So there's enough places that it's not front and center. Although I will tell you, my building is front and center on Main Street, Granite and Silt, which is 1 block long.
I was going to say, I
And
know exactly where you're located.
But I took a dilapidated building and I purchased it and I put $100,000 in it and I made it very nice. And guess what? I'm next to a restaurant and a coffee shop, so they love me because my customers shop there. The other thing I will say is if you look at the demographics of the consumers today, it's a lot of young family people. A lot of younger people are opting to consume cannabis over alcohol. And I'm proud to say that my mother just had surgery at 78 years old, and she is using a CBD product instead of opiates. And she's having better luck. And she can go to the bathroom. So I think that there are ways that you can do it where you won't damage that reputation. I think you have to ask yourself how much of that $11 million market in Aspen is really your market.
Okay.
Quick question for Lauren. In some of your front range on their zoning, is there any anything zoning where the shops can't be so close to each other?
Yeah, and that's in our valley as well. In Glenwood, I think the restriction's 300 feet from each other on Devereaux Road.
Okay.
So everything's zoned, in Glenwood in particular, everything's zoned basically to Devereaux Road, and everything has to be 300 feet from each other.
Okay.
And I think at Durango, it's one shop per block or something, or so many blocks?
Yeah, in Silt, we have a 500-foot setback. They had, I will say one thing Silt didn't do well that they later changed was they made everything by conditional use permit. And that creates a lot more work for staff because it's much better to define your zoning and say, we want it here, we don't want it here. In Palisade, they actually carved out what they called a marijuana-free zone, which is their little third and main downtown core, because that's where they do their festivals and parades and summer markets, so they carved that out.
Is that where the drive-through is? I haven't been.
No, that's in Parachute.
It's in Parachute.
No,
They
Parachute.
have a drive-through, right?
And Parachute's the opposite end of the spectrum, where they allow big green cross signs on the highway, and they've labeled their town
I
a
think this,
marijuana town.
what we need to do for our entrance into Snowmass is have a drive-through marijuana.
Brush Creek Road, right?
Where Checkpoint Charlie used to be.
There is a prohibition against the municipalities being involved in these businesses, so.
They do ask that on the application.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is, because I did read through a lot of these comments, a lot of the negative comments in here have more to do with things that are already prohibited. So public consumption is not allowed. Consuming on the ski lifts is not allowed.
They do it anyway.
Consuming on premises at a
done.
store, not allowed. So, yeah, so.
Up to our Thursday night concerts.
There are a lot of things that people will say we don't like about the industry, but it's not the industry. It's the consumers who are not obeying the laws.
Well, then you have to have more police to go enforce. So it's enforcement then.
So, question, and I don't know, we haven't talked about this. So how is a contract awarded to an individual or a corporation to set up a marijuana shop? Is it through the municipality, or is it through the state?
You have to be licensed through both. You file an application with the locals, you file an application with the state. Both have an opportunity to vet the applicant, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to add to that criteria of vetting. You are entitled to do that. And so long as there is nothing that is prohibited in your application, you are entitled to the license. So long as it meets zoning, the locals
Yeah.
have to approve, which is the zoning, time, place, manner, making sure that it all complies with your regulations, make sure it complies with their slightly broader regulations, generally. And then, so long as all of that is approved, there is a local and a state license with expiration dates.
So, Lauren, if there weren't a limit on the number of shops, or even if there were, and, numerous licensees come in at the same time, how does one differentiate? Or, what's the legal basis for differentiating between one or another?
So I have clients that ask me this question all the time. So, in Aspen, we were kind of one of the first experiments in Aspen. We had, I believe, 9 medical stores come in at first. It whittled down to there's one medical store, and now it's mostly retail, but, it regulated itself. It wasn't regulated by anything but a zoning designation. So it was almost, there were a lot of properties, so long as you could get the landlord to rent it to you with whatever their special conditions or added, bonuses were, you could be there. And it whittled itself down simply because not everybody can survive in that business. There's only so many to go around.
Great.
So it naturally whittled itself down. So it naturally can do that. Some people do place a cap. I think sometimes by providing a zoning, it naturally provides a cap. You can only have so many. So if you had a distance restriction of 300 from each other, if you had a zoning of, let's just hypothetically say, industrial, let's say that put it to 5 different places it could be, and maybe one of the landlords doesn't want to rent. So it naturally, and this is purely hypothetical, it naturally reduces itself.
So, but also, recently I spent about 2 years following the process to legalize and regulate this in Palisade. And Palisade was a very sought after city because it was now becoming the furthest west in Colorado. If you can imagine, when I opened, I was the furthest west in Silt that was allowed. So because of that, it was understood that it was going to be a very competitive process, that they were probably going to get numerous applications, and they needed a mechanism by which to evaluate the applicants and choose who gets a license. This is not an easy process, and they took about 9 months doing their zoning and establishing their regulations. So I encourage you to take all the time you need to do it right. It is not something that's done simply. When they started, they decided as a town to put it as their own ballot measure. They had a lot of public hearings, they had a lot of input from the industry, they had people who came and spoke against it, so you could have pro-con, they called it. So they felt like they were providing balanced information back to the community. They spent months discussing caps and zoning. But the big question was, how do you decide? Let's say you've got 6 applicants that are all zoned properly and et cetera. So they were starting down the path of using a merit-based system. There are some examples in the state of other towns that have created a merit-based system. That has pluses and minuses as well. But it was, really determining, I think, what's important to you as trustees, what's important to your town, what's important to you in the applicants, and how would you evaluate them? Because I feel like you have an opportunity to select who can come into your town. See, in the early days, it was first come, first serve, more or less. But now you will get inundated with applications, or maybe. In the end, they did a lottery. They decided to do away with the merit system, and they literally got a bingo machine. And I can tell you, I did a core request, so I read every application from every person that applied. There was a huge variance in the capability levels of the different applicants. There was a huge variance in the funding abilities of the different applicants. And as a result, they gave one license to the people who had a medical store there, so they didn't go through the lottery. No one else has come forward through the lottery because the people who got picked out of the hat haven't been able to move forward. And so now they basically have a busted process and they're not sure what they're gonna do about it. So, that's the problem with the lottery. In the lottery, you're equating the best and the worst. But the flip side is they were concerned about getting sued, so they felt that that was making it more fair.
So they were worried about a discriminatory process, is that?
I guess so,
the lawsuit?
yeah.
If I may,
Yeah.
I have to say, the first come, first serve, and evaluating an applicant that desires to be here and desires to show you that they want to be here. I have no issue with creating, some additional proof that you would like to see or things that you'd like to see from an applicant. But a merit-based system, like there are going to be 100 applicants to come into Snowmass, no offense, I just don't think that's really what you're setting yourself up, where you should be setting yourself up. If you have a couple things where you really want, like in Basalt or Glenwood, I forget which one, but they have a local residency requirement where the owner is required to have a zip code in the valley. So they have a stake in the game, right? So they feel like this valley is really important to them. That's one of the things that the locals did to, have more say-so over who's coming here to do this business.
So now I'm gonna play devil's advocate with you because Palisade had a local requirement. 51% owner had to be Palisade resident. So half the companies developed an operating agreement where Palisade resident owned 51% and was entitled to 5% of the profits. So they get around it. Carbondale requires a 10% owner to live within certain zip codes. Again, good idea because they want to know that there's somebody nearby that's accountable, right? But I knew of two license holders that just rented apartments in those zip codes and didn't live there. So I'm just saying that's why you have to think these things through. It is a complex issue, how you determine who gets the licenses.
It is complex, and I will say that I've seen my fair share in my side of the business of what I would call shotgun weddings, where people are partnering for the wrong reasons, things of that nature. So I don't disagree with some of that, but I'm just using it as an illustrative example as to what you can do to put into your local application if you want some sort of control over who it is. Whether it's that, they have assets of X amount of dollars, so you feel comfortable financially they're going to be able to pay their bills. Whether it be that they need to be a resident paying local taxes here. I don't know what it is but there is a whole realm of things that local jurisdictions have used throughout the state to feel good about who's coming in or to better evaluate who's coming in.
Do you have I'm thinking of cheat sheets that you present at conferences of the do's and the don'ts and what you should do and what you should not, and how you advise municipalities or?
I've, only when asked have I provided information to municipalities. They're very, territorial, it seems, when it comes to us providing draft ordinances and things of that nature. So, yeah, I'm sure I could put together just a, group of, cities or counties, because, they're different. And what, if there's some of the quirky things that they do, I'd be happy to provide that to you.
I will acknowledge that I'm a novice when it comes to knowing all the detail of all the zoning, even though we've gone to sessions and John's gone to tons of them. He probably has more information than I give him credit for, but.
You know,
Well, the good news
You're-
is, you're.
just a sec.
Oh, sorry.
They're so far much further down the road than you all are right now that it's like fantasy land, okay? The fundamental question's on the screen.
Yeah.
If you can't answer that, we're gonna keep doing this over and over and over again, because the myriad of regulations that you have at your disposal would take weeks of meetings like this for you to understand every possible thing. And if you haven't addressed the fundamental concept of, do we want this? Do we want to make the decision? Do we want the electorate to make the decision? We can have sessions like this every week and have different people like Lauren, Renee, Andrew, tell you all the history across the entire state. And it may or may not be right for Snowmass Village. But until we get to that fundamental question, we can talk till we're blue in the face.
Well, let me ask you a devil's advocate question. If you were, say, in industrial area, we don't have an industrial, do we?
That was so hypothetical. It could be agriculture, it could be commercial.
When she
it could
said it, I just went, oh, Lauren, we don't have that. We're not
I
gonna
understand.
have
It was
that.
just
We're
an
never
example.
gonna have that. But in places where she represents clients, that sometimes is the only place you can do it. Or it might be one of the places you can do it, depending on what they've determined are their time, place, and manner. And those are the regulations that you have to, but knowing, the reason we don't go out and survey landlords, because that question right there hasn't been answered yet. And we've been approached by people that want it and don't want it,
Right.
that are landlords. But they don't really want to come out and commit to say, absolutely, if you legalize it, we will rent. Because they may not own it by the time we get
Right.
to a regulatory scheme, assuming that the decision is made to allow dispensaries in Snowmass Village. Shops. Dispensary's kind of an old world, old
It
word.
naturally reduces, it's kind of that, you either allow it or you don't, and then the landowners say, we're in, we're not, they get a boon, that they potentially make a ton of money, because they're the only ones that maybe will rent. I mean, it's a boon to the players that want to play, and if nobody plays, then Snowmass has none.
So how much of this do we have to figure out before we decide what the ballot language? Don't we have to do the tax issue? I was gonna say,
The tax issue can only go this November or 2020.
But John, if we were to have a ballot issue to the community and include separately the statement about the excise tax, and let's say that both pass, then doesn't it become up to the council to determine whether to actually implement the excise tax? Or is it automatically implemented?
It would be implemented once you finish determining what your regulatory scheme was going to be. So in other words, it's there, you have authorization to implement it, and certainly you're going to implement it once you license.
Well, I guess my question is, does does the municipality have to implement it if it's been put on the ballot and it's been approved?
Implement what?
The excise tax.
Should.
Well, if you're gonna put it on the ballot and it doesn't pass, you can't do it.
Right.
If it passes, do you wanna pass on that revenue? I mean, is that,
Well, maybe as part of the regulatory, maybe as part of the discussion about all the regulations and the other things that have to be done in order to establish the criteria for the licensing, et cetera, we may decide during that work that we don't want to put the excise tax, this additional excise tax on.
you could garner the voters' approval and leave it in your discretion to implement or not implement.
Why would you not, given the argument for economic reasons that everybody's been using?
I don't
Well,
think it's an argument, I think it's
because
just a
right now, the
suggestion.
argument that I'm hearing says, don't implement an excise tax. That's the argument that I heard tonight, and I'm persuaded by the fact that of all these municipalities in the valley, only one has implemented the excise tax.
Basalt has a 5% tax as well, and they've had one store for most of the time
Yeah.
that I can tell you performs substantially below market, and I think it's because of that. I opened in Carbondale. I expected Carbondale to do 75% of the volume of my Silt store. So think about that for a minute, based on, I stand there on 133 and there are cars going by left
All
and
day
right,
long.
and Silt is now, right now, we're at double. And I really think that that sales tax hurts. It makes you anti-competitive.
It doesn't hurt Aspen.
They don't have it.
Aspen
They
doesn't have it. Aspen doesn't have it. So if you did not put it in, Aspen's tax on retail marijuana would be 21.4. Yours would be 22 point something.
5, you said.
22.5. So you're then looking at a 27.5% tax versus Aspen's 21.4.
You just
Some,
charge less.
But I think the
we
people that,
can, and you know what? In Carbondale, my prices are lower than Silt because I have, the tax is paid by the customer, but I have had to have it eat into my profits. And as much as everybody thinks we're making so much money, I wish. It's not, it's a nice business, but it's not,
It's a very taxed business.
it's extremely heavily taxed at the federal level.
How do you deal with the Trump politics? You know, I know what Gardner has told us, but to me, right now, we have a president who is very predictable about being unpredictable.
I think the general consensus in the industry, particularly, I know my lawyer did a podcast on when the Cole memo was being revoked initially. It would be virtually impossible to unwind this industry now. You have 30 states that have legal medical marijuana.
Right.
You have 9 states that have legal recreational marijuana. You have enormous states. You now have California.
Cory Gardner also just got a reaffirmation that Colorado is safe.
From,
And that was recent. That was within the last
I'm aware of it,
40
yeah.
days.
I mean, if anything, I think they're not legalizing it at the federal level because the IRS is making so much more money off us that they have to give that up. So,
that's an interesting theory.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that.
Goldman Sachs thought that, and they were right.
Anyway, the good news is your town staff has access to all the town staff in all these other towns to learn and to talk to them what's worked, what hasn't worked. So, and you'll have a lot of time, should you decide to move forward on this, to establish what's best for you. So I think John is right that it's kind of, the first level of question is, do you want to decide this or do you want to put it on the ballot?
So, we've been running in place for a while on this, and
That's the wrong verb. There's been no running done. I would say crawling
crawling
at
in
best.
place, okay. But I think that, from my perspective, that we have been presented with enough information vis-à-vis the survey that was done, the marketing board opinion, the financial advisory board opinion, and Travis's work on looking at other.
Did we get the FAB opinion?
Marketing board, he meant.
No, there was, the FAB, didn't FAB talk about this at their last meeting? Oh, excuse me. Okay. Well, you know, we've got Travis's opinion. I think it's time to make a decision.
Well, I'm fine. I'm glad that we have the financials in front of us. So that's very helpful.
Very helpful. I mean, I will start it off because I am in favor of doing the work to issue licenses for both recreational and medical. So I will start off with a motion to well, I don't know if I need a motion to this. If we're gonna set this up as a community vote, do we need to make a motion for this? No.
Well, I mean, what you would do is make a motion to staff to develop a ballot question.
Okay.
If
Well-
that's the direction you want to go, because it would be very beneficial to staff to know that there is a majority of council that wants to move forward on this.
Okay.
So that's how you clarify the direction.
All right. I know that there are substantial numbers in the community, including many people on the marketing board, that feel that this has already been voted on more than once, and that the council should, so to speak, suck it up and make their decision. I will say for myself that I am ready to make a decision with council. Now, I don't know if my other councilors are as favorably as inclined as I am. So I will also state that if, in fact, we have a majority of the council who is only comfortable with another vote by the community, I accept that, and we'll go in that direction as well.
Well, based upon the survey that has been done, and the community itself, now I'm not talking about the second homeowners, I'm talking about the survey that's been done from the residents. And I'm not so sure a ballot question is necessary. I'm almost willing to move forward and say yes, either way, either it's a question on a ballot, or maybe we should just host the decision to just move forward with it. And then the discretion of where we want it and how we want to zone it could be hashed out. I'm not using that term, but I don't know where that came from, but excuse me. But I didn't mean that. But that could be hashed out in regards to how we want to zone it and where and when we want to put it in. And we have the time to do it. So I agree with you, Bob, but I'm not so sure we need to go through and we're going to waste more time by putting it on a voter's paper. And then we have to figure out if we want the excise tax. If we put the excise tax on that ballot, maybe if we move forward and then just put the excise tax on it, then we have the option whether or not we want to use the excise tax.
You could word it that way.
We could word it that way. So I agree with you, but I'm not so sure we need to wait for the ballot. If anybody else wants to speak up about it.
Well, firstly, I'm really, really struggling here. As you all know, I struggle all the time when we get into drugs, and having pulled off all of the NIH research on impacts on adolescents and teens, I really struggle with it, really struggle, because I'm so concerned about kids, and the proliferation of the use of marijuana by our adolescents. There are impacts on the brain that are well documented in literature and research at the NIH. So that always worries me, being a healthcare I will tell you, I use a lot of marijuana in the work of providing hospice care, a lot of it. But, so I struggle. I also struggle with the fact that I'm a federal provider under Medicare, and needless to say, that really gets difficult for members of our staff, who I know probably do partake, but if they're tested, the more we have, the more people will use it. But that's just saying. But I can't prevent what people do in their spare time. The only thing I can do is test. The values of this town being family-oriented, and has been the history of this town, and ski code not allowing it, and that is our primary source of revenue. It's not anything else but the ski resort. So we need to recognize that. If we were to do it, I have some very, very, I don't want it on commercial properties at all. And the second floors frequently become the street on the backside. But, you know, we're starting to talk about potential places. I am not willing to accept the fact, let's just go do it, because if you look at that survey, you have to look at the demographics of the survey, and I think we need to be very conscientious about not just using our voters, but we have many part-time homeowners here, probably more so than what we have in terms of actual voters. So I think we have to listen to the entire community, whether it be our guests, whether it be our second homeowners, and then those who live here and do vote in Snowmass Village. The most I'm willing to even consider is putting on the ballot.
I might just say one thing, you know, you mentioned the ski company. There's 9 or 11 shops in Aspen. Ski company also has a mountain in Aspen. So they didn't have any say in regards to what happened
They
in there.
don't teach children how to ski over on Aspen Mountain.
Well, there are teenage programs, they do, and children do ski on Aspen Mountain all the time.
I know, but they don't.
I used to work over there when I taught, and anytime we wanted to, so it's not limited to adults only.
No, I know that, but you don't have a kids ski program over
No,
there.
but we have the treehouse, so we could come up with our, just like they do in preschools, where you could only be so many feet to it or whatever, to and from.
I know
So-
what we can do. The point is, anything that impacts the brains of children, I'm not going to support.
I'm not gonna really get into that discussion because, you know, we could talk about alcohol, we could talk about
Well, sure we can.
tobacco, we could talk about a lot of things when it comes down to that, because,
I can give you research on all the above. But go ahead. Bill or Alyssa?
You can go, Bill, if you want.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I do think that part of this discussion is really about, you know, where we all stand. And if we feel like we can move forward without taking this to the voters, I think we're saving ourselves a lot of time and energy by putting it on the ballot. So I think we're kind of getting a little bit of a straw poll here to see where we all stand on the issue. And if we can move forward without going to the voters, and we feel confident to do that, I would be happy to do so. I think it's, you know, it's where this world is going. I don't want to kind of look at it as if we're, you know, hiding in Snowmass in the past. I think that the numbers that we show on the survey are certainly, you know, skewed that way. And a lot of it just becomes about education. I am, you know, very concerned about the children in our community as well. And I think if you hide commercial operations, medical marijuana, or retail operations somewhere, it becomes more intriguing. And if you have it in front of the kids and you have that open dialogue and that conversation, then it really resonates. Whereas, you know, if there's that, well, I want to figure out what that place is in that dark alley or whatever it is, then it's a whole different conversation. So I'm of the mind that if we can come together as a group and make this decision to move forward, I would be, I would like to move forward that way as opposed to putting it on the ballot. If we're somewhat split and we feel like we need to hear from the voters, I would be happy to go that way as well.
So when I reread a lot of the comments last night, and you just see this trend among most of the comments. It's family, 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 family. I chose Snowmass because of family, and I chose Snowmass because, you know, it represents these things, and I feel this way when I come there. And I mean, I'm taking my own personal opinion out of it, and I'm just going by what people have been telling me, emails I've gotten, other parents I've seen that live in Snowmass. And I feel like the common feeling among most of those people is that they don't want it here. I don't think putting pot shops in Snowmass is going to stop people from going into Aspen. I mean,
It won't.
people are going to go into Aspen because Aspen is Aspen and Snowmass is Snowmass. And no matter what you do, people are going to go, whether they want to go see a famous person or sit at the Little Nell or go up to the top of the mountain and catch a view. People are going to go into Aspen, and we can't stop that. And if they go into Aspen, they're probably going to go check out the pot shops. I don't think it's Snowmass hiding in the past. I think it's a question of, we have limited space in this town. And is that the best use of our space, to put a pot shop, where something else that could maybe keep people in Snowmass, help the people that have the restaurants and stores? I mean, chances are a lot of those people that are buying marijuana are probably want to go out in Aspen and hang out anyways. I mean, I don't think it's keeping us in the past. I just think that we have to look at the space we have and decide if that's what we want to do with our space. One of the comments that someone made in there that I really liked is they said, you know, does Snowmass need to be like everybody else? I mean, we are a unique community, and we have a lot of things that places in this country don't have. And do we need to have a pot shop? Do we need to be like the rest of the communities in Colorado and the other states that are now allowing it? And that really stuck with me as I read all the comments. I understand that marijuana is everywhere, and that, you know, if a kid can't get it in Snowmass, they could still go smell it in Aspen or on the chairlift or wherever it is. I get that. I just am trying to look at what the community is saying. And for me, yeah, there were a lot of comments from people that, yeah, just allow it, just allow it. But there wasn't a lot of meat to what they were saying. And I also don't know that the money that's coming in from it is necessarily a reason to do it either. I also have an issue with sending it to the voters. I feel like it does leave out a huge segment of our community, which are the second homeowners. You know, I mentioned it before. I mean, when Base Village was up for a vote, a lot of people changed their voting residency just to vote on that issue. And that could happen again. But that's my problem with taking it to a vote, is that I'm concerned that a lot of those people who would feel like it would impact our community won't have a say. And that bothers me, because even though they might not be registered, they're still valued members of this community. So.
Alyssa, have you watched the marketing board meeting where they discussed marijuana and came up with their proposal to us?
No, I didn't watch it.
You should watch it, because they talk about the concept of family-oriented, et cetera, and they feel that they, from a marketing perspective, they have not seen responses from families, negative responses from families. It's just not anything that comes up on their radar. It's on our radar, but it apparently isn't on the guests' radar. So I would suggest that you take a look at that and actually watch that portion of that meeting. It surprised me, frankly, because it was not what I expected. On the other hand, well, I lost track of some of the other things I was going to say. But that was primarily what I wanted to say. Children, okay? Yeah, none of us want kids getting hooked up on drugs, right? That's not the deal. legalized recreational marijuana has been now legal in Colorado for 4 or 5 years. The bloom is sort of off the rose. Pretty much every child has had some experience, either some conversation with a friend or smelling it on the road or something. And what is different now than was when I was a father and I had younger kids is that when it's legal, it becomes part of parenting to explain to those kids what marijuana is, just like what alcohol is, just like what tobacco is. When my kids were, 8, 12, 14 years old, it wasn't, marijuana wasn't legal. But so you spoke about tobacco, you spoke about alcohol because the kids could see it, certainly, and marijuana was more in the back alley, as Bill, mentioned. But today's world, that's part of parenting, and to think. So I just have a difficult time. Equating this, the availability of marijuana or licensing of marijuana in Snowmass to the family value business and the family
Now, wait.
destination.
I hear what you're saying, the family destination. How many states have legalized recreational marijuana?
What, 9?
9 out of 50 states.
Okay.
So you have 41 states that do not. Our guests come from all over the world and from all of these other states. So their first exposure, if you will, to smelling it on the ski slopes or seeing it in the town will be Snowmass Village,
Maybe.
but far more than what they have in their current state. That's one
But
of the
they
reasons.
all, but that's not, but the point is, they all know that it's legal in these 9 states, including Colorado.
Right, and that's the reason why you also have other ski communities who've chosen not to have pot shops in their communities. So they don't damage their reputation as a family-friendly
Okay.
resort.
Well, essentially, let me just say something. Essentially, if
only
there is supposed to be a
I know
damage,
in Beaver Creek.
Even at the other states.
if there is supposed to be a damage, if there's if there's an actual damage, it's already happened. Because Aspen is selling recreational marijuana. And this Snowmass Mountain is just an extension of Aspen Mountain. So I won't buy that argument because it's already in Aspen, it's already here. Just as we know that our guests go into retail stores and ask people where are the pot shops, it's here. It's not a question of coming from some state that doesn't legalize, that hasn't licensed recreational marijuana, and never hearing about it. People know it when they get here. They know that this is a place where recreational marijuana is legal.
And they can go buy it.
Yeah, and they should buy it here. Why should they have to go 9 miles away to buy it?
Because we don't sell it.
Well, we should sell it, that's my point. We should get up into the 21st century.
I'm not willing to put this, I'm not willing to do it tonight. I think if it's anything, it has to go to the voters.
Well,
I really think that's the right thing. We've been very conscious over the years about having marijuana, and now what you want to do is take this issue and move the pendulum totally over here without really community sessions. We have not had public hearings on this issue.
Well, this is a public hearing, right?
Yeah, we have just a very
No.
few people here.
It was on the
It's
agenda.
an administrative report.
I mean,
Continued-
it was
it's a
on the agenda.
Continuation of medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, could we see if anyone else in the public who hasn't spoken would like to speak?
Yeah, come on up.
Lauren, by the way, and thank you very much. much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Just getting my balance back. I'm Jay Shoemaker, property owner here. Can you hear? Is the mic on?
No, can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The light's on. You know, I was having a hard time. Too close? Too close. Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Okay. Yeah, if the I think I made the comment once before, if the packets aren't well in advance of your meetings, and you're requested to supply whatever you're going to say a week in advance, you got 15 minutes to prepare your comments. So I don't think this meeting was on the agenda 2 weeks ago when I checked. Anyway, I have some comments that I'd like to read to you and hand out to you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jay, I'm
Yes,
just
sir.
going to ask you, I mean, you don't have to read this if you don't want to. We can take a minute and read this. And then
I'll
we
read
can
it with
talk
you.
about it.
I'll read it with you. I mean, tone makes a difference. Thanks for the, I think the study that shows pot shop generated $3 million tax dollars, but that's old news. An alternative study might suggest a branding campaign boasting the refusal of pot shops. And it could generate family bookings way in excess of 1 to 3%, that campaign. If pot generates 1 to 3% new taxes, what would a likely increase of 10% of family visits generate in taxes? Alternatively, what might be the loss of 10% of family visits, the cost of it, as families predictably don't come back. And the survey showed that several wouldn't. Add pot shops to employee housing, and you've created a pothead mecca.
I'm
And-
sorry, I don't think that's even necessary. I saw that on the sheet. I don't think that's even necessary, Jay.
These
You
are,
come up
these,
with that comment.
I think there's a connection between cheap housing and marijuana and the abuse of it. And my comment, it's illustrated in what I say, that familiar slouch and progressive lifestyle around our shops in the mall, little restaurants and beer bars and lift lines, and all around our
You
condos.
just heard an experience with somebody who has a licensed marijuana shop next to a restaurant, and and both businesses support one another. So these are your opinions. I get it.
That's right. It's my
Okay?
opinion.
They're
But
your opinions, and
her-
you are.
her comment was her
I really-
demographic
I
was.
think we owe it to our people who come up to do public comment to listen to the public comment and not.
That makes sense. I think her demographic. She pointed out something counterintuitive to me, surprising to me as a parent and grandparent, that it seemed to be the younger families seemed to be going to her shop, which didn't seem right. Then I thought, well, wait a minute, what is the demographic of Silt? What kind of people are?
Why don't you just continue to read your message?
Yeah, Silt's a great little town.
Snowmass Village is a great town. It's I think, the best and most attractive ski resort in North America. I said I think Snowmass Village is the most attractive ski resort in North America. And I worry some about the proliferation of that new progressive lifestyle around our condos. One of my best friends who came from Mexico would have to close her windows in the winter, but open them to exhaust to pull the pot smoke out of her condo. She's very sensitive to it. But of course, that created a chimney through her condo. The other point is, if pot shops generate $5 million in sales, how could they ever be inconspicuous? They'd be some of the busiest shops in Snowmass Village. Wouldn't the potheads line up outside these shadow locations? That was the point also made. You can't hide them. You probably shouldn't. And then what happens to adjacent shops? Well, if they're restaurants, who knows, in this community. Imagine life at the Family Center in Building 6, the ice skating rink, the Discovery Center, and pot shops nearby with liberated 20-somethings milling around these activities, and parents obliged to shepherd their children through the odor. As nearly half of the locals polled, but 71% of the visitors who can't vote oppose pot shops, I think there's your answer to who must make the decision. You have to make it. Snowmass Village should celebrate her brand and advertise that, contrary to other Colorado ski resorts, the town of Snowmass has banned marijuana dispensaries. And sit back and enjoy the solid stream of condo sales and repeat family bookings. So, anyway, thank you for letting me. I'm speaking as a grandfather of 4. Thank you.
Other comments?
Hello.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for everyone else and with their comments as well. I know it's been a taxing issue for you guys. You get plenty of public outpour because it's such a small community, you know, so many people. I'm sure you've heard it all. So thank you for sifting your way through it. I am part of I didn't introduce myself. My name's Andrew Wicks. I am part of the 73% of business owners in Snowmass Village that do recommend that the moratorium be lifted. Those 73%, I don't think all just want to get high on their lunch breaks. They do see the synergies of having marijuana shops in town. Like it or not, people are smoking around here and they're buying it. The only difference is they're not buying it here. I do agree with Councilwoman Schenk that people, if you're coming to Aspen Snowmass, you are going to go to Aspen. Mm-hmm. I agree with that 100%. In my experience owning and managing a liquor retail shop, the difference is, are they going to Aspen once or 2 or 3 or 4 times? If a family comes in on Wednesday evening, they might have had plans to go to Aspen on Friday evening to go out to dinner or shop. What we're seeing is people changing their plans as soon as they get to town, asking for shuttle services from their lodging companies to go to town right away. And we're not just losing the tax base on the marijuana sales, that's also being lost in dinners and entertainment and so forth. We do experience it every day at our shop, and I think that it's a very real phenomenon, that it's not just the one time that we're missing out. We're missing a lot of leakage. The seasonality of Snowmass is what it is. It's both a blessing and a curse. We all enjoy it, but I think it also can degrade our level of service as well as our economic base. These shops won't only just provide more tax base through the revenues. You'll get more people. Say you have 2 shops, that could be 10 people that now have gainful employment in Snowmass year-round, because I don't anticipate that those shops would shut down in the off-season. You get more people staying here, spending money, and to give even just 10 people or 15 people in a community this size, the opportunity to work full-time will help retain more people in general. We try and do that with our store in particular. We try and retain the same staff and not have to deal with the turnover all the time because we want to cultivate a community. I believe, as seen today, the tax revenues along with that make it worth it, especially because I don't think the town would experience many costs with the proximity of the police department and the other 8 communities not needing to implement additional officers. I don't think there'd be additional security that is required. You've heard from the police director that they're okay with or without it, but they also don't anticipate an uptick in the services that they need to provide just because the product is sold here and not just consumed here. The capturing the sales, I just don't believe won't change the community fabric because, as we've all mentioned today, the smoking is happening on lodging properties, on the ski resorts. I'm even going to just blow our minds here, hopefully, and go crazy. As legislation changes, perhaps what we could do to kind of sequester some of these challenges that are brought up is that we could be a forward-thinking place that actually offers a club or a place where people can go to consume. That would eliminate, hopefully, more public smoking. It would eliminate issues with the lodging. Again, I'm just going way out, but there are problems to solve, and you guys and other people, especially on the questionnaire, have brought these issues up. And so I think the only way to solve them is to go above and beyond, is to look at future legislation and how we can accommodate a place that is more of an informational center where people are allowed to smoke, because the current discrepancies in the law say you can purchase, but you can only consume in private residences. We all know that discrepancy. Maybe let's think even farther ahead and let's solve those issues, because we all do want to keep it a community resort. As a longtime community member, it's my opinion that lifting the moratorium will not degrade the Snowmass resort community. I don't think that we're any more family-oriented than, say, Keystone or Breckenridge have been over the past few years, maybe for particular things. However, they didn't see a dramatic drop-off in tourism or visitor once allowing this product. So I think there's vitality that can be accomplished through providing these services. And thank you for sifting through the hard decisions to consider it.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew.
Anyone else? Mike?
I'm Mike Sura. I'm on the marketing board, but I do not represent them in my comments. In fact, I was not going to make comments tonight, but I was out of town, really wasn't prepared to speak, but a couple things have come up tonight that I'd like to at least comment on. I think that this council has been kicking this can long enough. I think even tonight I have noticed that there are people on the council that don't want to make a decision. They want everyone else to make the decision, and yet that decision really has been made through other referendums. As far as part-time people that live here, they have every right to register to vote here. They have elected not to. They want to live in New York. They have a place here. If they're concerned, they don't vote for the people on the council. And if you look at the results of the survey, it's pretty unanimous. I'm not taking a personal position tonight. And like I said, I wasn't even going to hear. And I loved Bob's comment about parenting. I'm a father of 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters. I grew up with just my brother and I. Our parents were great in telling us and guiding us through these kinds of decisions as we grew up. I don't think it's the responsibility of the government to interfere with that parenting situation. So, kick the can, let's get on with it. I think it's a waste of time and money to have a referendum. I think this body needs to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, let's do a straw poll.
Okay.
You want me to go first?
Yep.
So I'm saying yes or no to what?
To go forward?
Well, and Madam Mayor, if I might, if you could actually even make it a motion so it's clear for us, if someone could do it, I mean, if these two frameworks are in fact accurate, if you could make a motion to one of those two, that would be helpful for us so we could know what our next steps would be.
Motion you're referring to is lifting the moratorium.
No, I think the motion would be, do you want to put it to a ballot question, or do you want to keep it the question with the council? And then once you answer those two questions, then we would have at least a better idea of what our next step is as staff to provide the council.
I move to put it on a ballot as a ballot initiative.
I'm for the council making a decision.
I'm for council making the decision.
I think based on what I've heard tonight, I'm also for making a decision at the council level.
I don't really like the choices, but I would just put it on the ballot, I guess.
So we have a 3-2. Do I have a motion accordingly? Because I had a motion to put it on the ballot.
All right, I'll make a motion.
Well, I moved, you got a motion already on the floor. I did not get a second. So that motion basically dies.
Correct.
Wait, oh,
I don't think you asked
I'm
for
so
a second.
confused.
Okay,
I think you made your motion,
Yeah, and then I just,
Bob made a motion on top of it.
so my motion was to place the initiative on a ballot for 2018. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Discussion? I've already said my piece, but I wonder if there could be a study of that campaign I suggested.
I can't hear a word he's
No,
saying.
wanted to know if we could do a survey based on the campaign, of what would happen.
The suggestion was to sponsor a campaign nationwide, which probably start on the website, that Snowmass Village has chosen to be a family resort and has banned marijuana dispensaries. It doesn't mean there isn't plenty of pot around, but I think there's real value in promoting the family aspect of this resort. I mean, real value, much more than $5 million a year. If you lost 10% of your families, and some of us have invested here, and we lose some of that too because there's so much smoke coming through the walls, there's value there lost. So that's.
Thank you, Jay. So we have, any other further discussion?
And this is a motion to direct staff to prepare a ballot language.
Right, which I personally think is far more palatable to the community, given they're part-time homeowners that may not vote, but we need to listen to their voice as well as our voters. So I think it's the middle of the road. It's fair, it's equitable, and it also deals with the excise issue. So that was my motion. All in support? Aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay, I should say, nay.
Okay. So it will not be a ballot initiative. Direct staff to start preparing.
So I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to, what is it, John? To
Direct staff.
To direct staff to remove the
Moratorium.
the moratorium, well, forget, direct staff to begin to determine the requirements that would be necessary or to alert the council on requirements for the licensing of medical and recreational marijuana. Close enough?
I think we have to have a resolution prepared, don't we, in terms of lifting the moratorium?
Well, I think he withdrew the part about the moratorium.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
the
I did.
direction to staff is to proceed, to provide information to council, to make a decision, and I assume that that means developing a regulatory scheme.
Right.
And we have some time to, you have some time to determine whether or not you want to put a tax question on this year's ballot. So the direction to staff is to start the process of developing a regulatory scheme to allow marijuana to be sold in Snowmass Village.
And
a
to
second?
prepare an excise tax for the ballot.
Okay? Is
I'll second that motion.
the joint motion
Or
of,
which one? You had a
Bob-
motion?
Bob's motion.
With,
But then we, as John said, we have time to talk about the excise tax.
That's a,
so
that's,
you second Bob's motion. Now I think Bill wants to make a motion
Yes.
to amend Bob's motion.
right.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to amend Bob's motion to add a a tax ballot,
Question.
a taxing issue to the ballot.
Okay, do I have a,
I'll second that
okay.
amended motion.
You have to withdraw,
No,
Right?
he's
No, it's-
amending
it's
the motion,
amended.
he's
It's amended
seconding it.
already.
okay.
Now you call the question on the amendment. Who's in favor of the amendment?
Okay, do we have any discussion? All in support, say aye.
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 Okay,
Opposed, same sign.
now call the question on the amended the
Okay,
amendment
now we're ready
carried.
to talk about the amendment to do the tax, the excise tax as a ballot addition. No?
No,
That he just did.
Bob's motion was seconded.
Yeah?
Bill made a motion to amend
And
it.
that, and
That was seconded. That
now,
was voted on and carried. Now you have the amended motion before the body, and you need a vote on that.
okay. Do we all understand what the amended motion is? Is, was. All in support?
Aye.
The amended motion is to direct staff to begin the work,
Right,
right, for developing this
regulatory.
regulatory system in addition to
Excise tax.
the wording for an excise tax.
Okay.
Okay.
All in
Aye.
support? Okay, your aye?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Nay.
So it's 3-2, so that goes forward. Okay. What other business do we have tonight? We have council reports.
Madam Mayor, there's one piece of business that I guess I'd like to put out, and that, Clint, with the potential for an increased state sales tax with this transportation ballot issue, when, as the 2019 budget is being reviewed and considered, can staff look at what they anticipate the effect of that, if that were to come to be, in terms of our overall sales tax, or
Yeah, yes.
how we might have a Plan B for kind of dealing with that?
I mean, it's easy to deal with. Yes. I mean, right now, in a rough number, and these are really rough because I don't recall, but that .62 sales tax is slightly more than we would bring in our current share of gas tax, HUTF dollars. And if I remember right, it's about $200,000 more if that .62% sales tax were to pass. So I could give you an estimate to say, with an additional roughly $200,000, and we have a better estimate than my head, we could say we could potentially achieve A, B, and C.
Well,
Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm actually thinking about it from the other direction, because it makes our sales tax,
ungodly,
very high, almost 11%-ish.
right.
And what's the effect, what do we anticipate that effect to be? if that were to come to pass.
Well, the entire, I guess we hadn't thought about it that way, but the entire state would be affected equally. So if we're 8% above everybody else, we would remain, and I'm not 8 percentage points, but I mean, our ratio of being higher than everybody else would remain
Would
the
stay
same.
the same.
Because everybody goes up that 0.62%. So we actually hadn't done that evaluation. At least I'm not aware of us doing that evaluation.
Well, I guess that's what I'm really asking about, is there, I mean, at what level does, even if everyone, even other municipalities go up the same relationship, at what level of sales tax starts to drive people to lower sales tax?
Doesn't Winter Park have the highest?
Yes.
Yeah. So one thought could be to lower our sales tax.
By that 0.62, by the,
I don't know
Yeah.
what that number would be, but just thinking about the generation of sales tax, when Base Village comes up and more of the village develops, whether it be here, at the center, what have you, it might be wise that we take a look at the impact, how much money we have coming in and what we really, really need to operate the town. It's starting to become a disincentive, which we know for our shop owners. And
Yeah.
now you add the gas tax on top of that, you start getting 12%.
we're just starting the budget, and
Sure.
honestly,
I know.
without doing a whole lot of homework, we weren't gonna plug in that passing.
Okay.
I don't know, I haven't seen any polling, I don't know where it's at.
I guess my point of bringing it up tonight was to get it on the radar.
Okay. Yeah, and we're the second highest now, we would remain the second highest, so the fact that it hits everybody even, we'd have to figure out a way to do an elasticity demand on that. I don't know how we would do that, but we could guess.
Okay.
I've got a core meeting this Thursday, so I have nothing new with core until next week.
Yeah, and I don't have anything new with ROAPA at this point.
Last week was a raft meeting, very lengthy meeting on e-bikes, which was a major topic. And then, as we all know, the property tax initiative of the 3.65 mills. And you've seen the results of how the polling is, really, it's a neck and neck battle. The financial feasibility model and the financial modeling is still being worked on and reviewed again within the RAFTA, so I would have sent it out, but we were asked not to send it out yet. But there's a lot of detail, and you gotta know all the detail, and you've gotta have someone present it. Just to read their study is not very helpful. So I think that's gonna be, it's very hard for us to think about the state doing a 0.6 sales tax initiative, and then RAFTA looking at a 3.65%. There'll have to be a lot of work done by all of us relative to the RAFTA issue. So that's all I have for RAFTA.
They're gonna need some slick marketing to
Oh, the
get
amount
that
of money
to go.
we're putting into this.
But the downside is, if it doesn't pass, then it's, then
Cut
we're
back.
really in a pickle.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
gonna-
well, maybe the ask is too aggressive.
Well, I think that's what their retreat was all about, right?
Right.
Try to find that
You know.
middle ground.
They looked at
We looked at
asking-
2%, we looked at 2.2.
Yeah, I mean, it really, when you sit down, you get in a room with everyone, it made the most sense.
It made the most
It's
sense.
hard to understand unless you were part of the discussions, but it really did make the most sense.
And the goal here is not to come back every 4 or 5 years for another tax initiative. And yes, it's a lot of money, and it's a huge request, but so is the valley growing and more use of RAFTA, and we need to get rid of some of the old buses, and the electric buses make a lot of sense. And they're pricey, they're $1 million each.
Yeah, they are pricey.
They're very pricey.
Very pricey.
And we don't want diesel buses, the CNG. We're having problems with some of the CNG, and it's the old fleet that are still running on diesel that they've got to get rid of. They're past their date, and we're just the guys are just making them work. so.
Yeah, and ridership is increasing.
Yeah.
We want to get more people on those buses, so
Right.
it's going to have to pass in some form. It's just going to be hard to get people to sink their teeth into it. I have a Nordic Council meeting this Wednesday, so no update today.
I don't have anything.
COG is not meeting, or hasn't met Northwest COG?
No, I talked about it at the last meeting.
Okay.
Because we met in May, and then they don't meet again until the end of July.
Okay, I don't think there's any other agenda items that I know of.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Thank you. Do a second? All in
Second.
support?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Find him and get down.